My daughter-in-law's mother was standing at my workbench with her hand on my table saw, telling her sister over the phone that the workshop would obviously be theirs once I got too old to use it. I set my coffee down on the porch rail so quietly that neither of them heard the screen door. A man can hand someone a spare key. That doesn't mean he's handed them a claim. By the time Marlene Petrosky understood the difference, there was a deputy standing in my driveway writing her license plate number into a report, and her daughter was crying in my kitchen asking me how any of this had happened without her knowing a thing about it. My name is Walter Ben. I'm 71, born and raised outside Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I spent 41 years as a machinist and then a shop foreman before I retired and finally had time to finish the woodworking projects I'd been putting off since Nixon was president. I've got one son, Michael. He's 36, sharp, quiet the same way his mother used to go quiet before she said something you'd remember for years. My wife Carol died 4 years ago this coming November. Stroke. Fast, no warning, no long goodbye, just a Tuesday morning that turned into something else entirely. I don't dress that up either. Some things you just say plain. If you've ever had somebody treat the last thing you built with your own two hands like it was already theirs for the taking, you know exactly the kind of cold I mean. The kind that doesn't come from outside. Stick with me tonight, because what happened over the next month changed how I look at my own family, and maybe it'll change something in how you look at yours too. Carol never cared much about the workshop. That was mine, always had been. But she cared plenty about the land it sat on, 12 acres out past Chippewa Falls that her father had farmed before he sold off most of it, and kept a few acres with an old barn on it for himself. When Carol's dad passed, she inherited that barn and those acres, and I converted it, board by board, into the finest workshop a retired machinist could ask for. Poured a new concrete floor myself over 2 brutal weekends. Ran electrical the right way, not the fast way. Built cabinets along every wall, a dust collection system, good lighting, a wood stove for winter. Carol used to bring me lunch out there and sit on the old porch swing we salvaged from her parents' place. And she'd say the barn finally looked like it knew what it wanted to be when it grew up. After she passed, I didn't go out there for almost 4 months. The quiet in that barn was a different kind of quiet than the quiet in the house, somehow worse, because it was a place we'd built together out of nothing. When I finally went back, I went slow, swept the floor, oiled the machines that had gone stiff from sitting, sat on that porch swing and let myself feel the kind of sad that doesn't flatten you, just sits with you a while. That spring I decided to fix the place up properly. New roof on the barn, upgraded wiring for a couple bigger machines I'd been eyeing, a proper heat pump so I wasn't hauling firewood at 71 years old anymore. Wasn't planning to sell, never that. I wanted it ready for whenever Michael and his wife Ashley had kids. Wanted them to grow up with a grandfather's workshop the way some kids grow up with a lake or a barn or a garden, something that belonged to the family and stayed that way. Michael married Ashley Petrosky 3 years back. Michael's a good man, works in logistics for a shipping company out of Minneapolis, calls me every Sunday whether he's got news or not, which is its own kind of gift when you're a widower. Ashley's people, the Petroskys, live down in Rockford, Illinois. Her father, Gary, ran a landscaping business into the ground twice and blamed the economy both times. Her mother, Marlene, has one of those laughs that never quite reaches her eyes, the kind of laugh you learn to read after enough years on this earth. I never disliked either one of them exactly. I just never trusted the way Gary looked at things that weren't his. The trouble started on a Thursday in June. I'd driven out to the barn to meet an electrician named Dale about running a dedicated line for a new planer I'd finally decided to treat myself to. Stopped for gas in town, and the kid behind the counter told me it was going to be a scorcher. Said it like he was warning me about something personal. I told him I'd survived 71 Wisconsin summers and I'd manage one more. He laughed. I left him a little extra on the pump receipt for the coffee. It was one of those bright, hard light mornings. The kind where the heat hasn't fully settled in yet, but you can feel it coming, waiting behind the trees like it's got somewhere to be. I had a folder of quotes on the passenger seat and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, and I was thinking about nothing more complicated than where I was going to route that new electrical line. I turned onto the gravel drive at 9:20 in the morning. First thing I noticed was the gate standing wide open, chain hanging loose against the post. Then the tire tracks, fresh, wide, the kind a trailer leaves when it's been dragged in and out a few times already. I slowed the truck before the bend, and when the barn came into view, my hands went tight on the wheel without my telling them to. 3 vehicles sat in my gravel lot. Gary's gray Silverado, a rental box truck with Illinois plates, and a sedan I didn't recognize parked half on the grass like whoever drove it didn't think the lines applied to them. The back roll door on the box truck was up, and I could see furniture inside, a dresser, what looked like a headboard wrapped in moving blankets. My new lumber, the good cherry and walnut I'd special ordered for a dining table commission, was stacked exactly where I'd left it, but somebody had shoved my outdoor furniture off the porch swing and onto the grass to make room for a folding table and 2 lawn chairs. Music was drifting out of the open barn doors, not loud, just easy, the kind of volume people play when they believe they've got every right to be standing where they're standing. I sat there in the truck for a good 10 seconds. That's something you learn with age, if you're paying attention. You don't run at every fire. You look first. You count what you're seeing. You breathe. Then you decide whether it's an emergency or a trap for your own temper. I cut the engine, grabbed my phone off the seat, and walked up the gravel toward my own barn. The side door was propped open with a paint can. I stepped through and found Gary Petrosky standing at my workbench, with his hand resting on the table saw fence, like he was inspecting a piece of equipment he was thinking about buying. Marlene was over by my tool cabinet, on the phone, saying the word obviously, in a tone I recognized from every entitled person I'd ever crossed paths with in 41 years of shop floors. A young man I didn't know, maybe 25, was carrying a box marked kitchen toward the back stall where I kept my finished lumber drying. A woman I'd never met sat in one of my lawn chairs on the porch, scrolling her phone, a paper plate of something balanced on her knee. And there, right there on Carol's porch swing, shoved to one side to make room for the folding table, sat a stack of file folders and a laptop like somebody had set up an office. For a moment nobody noticed me. Then Gary turned, saw me standing in the doorway, and grinned. Not sheepish, not caught, grinned wide, like I'd shown up late to a party he'd thrown in my honor. "Walter," he said, spreading his arms out like he owned the welcome mat. "Perfect timing. We were just getting settled." I looked at the box truck through the open doors. I looked at Marlene still on the phone, not even bothering to lower her voice. I looked at the muddy footprints tracked across the concrete floor I'd poured myself, that Carol used to say was cleaner than most people's kitchen counters. Then I looked back at Gary. "What are you doing in my barn?" Marlene ended her call fast, the way people do when they realize they're about to be quoted. Gary chuckled, easy, like I'd asked something silly. "Relax, Walt. Michael gave Ashley the door code months ago. We're just moving some things up while the rental market's soft down in Rockford. Figured we'd get set up before the season gets busy." "Set up for what?" "For living eventually," Marlene said, stepping in now, her voice sweet in that particular way that isn't sweet at all. "Walter, be honest with yourself. Michael's your only child. Ashley's his wife. One day all of this comes to them anyway. We're not exactly strangers." The young man in the doorway laughed under his breath, like this was all a foregone conclusion he'd already accepted. Gary lifted a can of something off my workbench and took a slow sip. "No need to make a thing of it. We figured we'd start bringing some furniture up now, save everybody the hassle later. This place has good bones. We can finish out that back stall, put in a kitchenette, hardly touch your shop side at all. I have been angry plenty of times in my life. I've raised my voice. I've said things I wished I could take back the second they left my mouth. I sat in a hospital corridor 4 years ago and asked God some questions he never bothered answering. But standing in that barn, watching a man take a drink standing at my workbench while his wife discussed floor plans for a kitchenette in my late wife's barn, I felt something colder than any of that. I felt the exact moment something in me stopped being hurt and started being methodical. I took my phone out. Gary's grin thinned out just slightly. "Who are you calling?" I looked him dead in the eye. "The sheriff's department." That got the room quiet fast. Marlene's face changed first, some color leaving it. The young man stopped mid-step, box still in his arms. The woman on the porch set her paper plate down on the swing, without seeming to notice she'd done it. Gary laughed, short, thinner than before. "Walt, come on. Don't be ridiculous. This is a family situation." I pressed the call button. When the dispatcher picked up, I gave my name, my address, and said, plain and clear, "There are people inside my property who don't have permission to be here. They've brought a moving truck, and they're unloading furniture. I want a deputy out here, and I want a report filed." Gary set the can down. That was the first sensible thing he did all morning. While we waited, nobody moved another box. Nobody said the word family again. Gary tried starting an explanation twice, and both times I held up one hand and said, "Save it for the deputy." She arrived 19 minutes later. Deputy Ann Ferris, steady eyes, the kind of calm that comes from having done this 100 times before and knowing exactly how it usually goes. I showed her my driver's license, the property tax statement I keep folded in my truck's glove box, and the recorded deed on my phone. Gary tried interrupting her 3 times. She let him get 4 or 5 words out each time before saying, evenly, "Sir, I'm speaking with the property owner right now." That sentence did more work in that barn than anything I could have shouted. I walked Deputy Ferris through the whole scene, the box truck, the furniture, the folding office set up on Carol's porch swing, the muddy tracks across my floor. The young man finally set his box down without being told twice. Then Deputy Ferris found the second thing that mattered. Sitting on the folding table next to the laptop was a manila folder, and inside it, a printed lease application with Gary Petrosky's name on it, addressed to my barn's rural route number. Deputy Ferris photographed it. Gary's face went the color of drywall. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That folder was doing the talking for me. Deputy Ferris told everyone present they needed to leave, and that returning without written permission from me would risk a trespassing charge. She took down names, license plates, gave me a case number written on the back of her card. Gary stood in the gravel lot while the young man, who turned out to be Ashley's cousin Dustin, loaded the boxes back into the truck. The whole time Gary looked at me like I was the one who'd wronged him. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, once the others were out of earshot. "Ashley's not going to like hearing about this." I looked past him toward the tree line, toward the old fence Carol's father had put up 60 years before either of us was born. "Gary," I said, "the mistake was thinking my son's marriage handed you a barn." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A locksmith from town showed up before the dust off Gary's truck had even settled. I'd called him while the deputy was still writing her report. He rekeyed both barn doors, replaced the old combination lock on the side entrance, and installed a small camera above the main doors, aimed square at the driveway. By early afternoon, every code anybody outside my immediate family had ever used was dead. Then I called Michael. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful, half a laugh in his voice already. "Hey, Dad, what's going on?" I closed my eyes for a second before I answered. "Son, did you give Ashley the code to the barn?" A pause, longer than I liked. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Back in the spring, remember, in case she needed to grab something for the garden shed side while I was traveling for work." "Why?" "Did you know her parents were planning to move furniture in?" "What?" "No." His voice changed on that word, the same way I imagined mine had changed 20 minutes earlier. "No, Dad." "What happened?" I told him everything, plain, the way I'd told the deputy. The truck, the furniture, the folding office on his mother's porch swing, the lease application with Gary's name on it, the deputy, the case number. By the time I finished, Michael had gone quiet in a way that worried me more than shouting would have. "I didn't know any of that," he said finally. "Dad, I swear to you, I had no idea. Ashley told me her folks were between leases and might need somewhere to store a few things temporarily. I told her we'd have to ask you first. I never said yes to any of it." "I believe you," I said. And I did. There's a difference between a son who's lying and a son who's been used as a door somebody else walked through without permission. There was a rustling on the line, then his voice pulled away from the phone. "Ashley, get in here. We need to talk." If you've ever sat with the particular ache of watching your own child realize somebody they trusted had quietly used that trust against your wishes, you know it isn't the clean kind of anger. It's closer to grief, dressed up in a different coat. That evening, Dale the electrician showed up, having mixed up the day same as everyone else that week apparently. He found me sitting on Carol's porch swing, moved back to its rightful spot, with 2 sandwiches I hadn't touched and the old cedar toolbox that used to belong to Carol's father open beside me. I'd checked it after everyone left. Nothing missing. But somebody had pulled out the folded quilt Carol kept over the workbench stool and draped it decoratively across the folding table like part of a display for a rental listing. Dale stood there a minute, cap in his hands. "Rough day?" "It just became a documented one," I told him. He nodded slow, like that explained everything, which it kind of did. Next morning I called my attorney, Diane Kessler. Diane, 68, wears her reading glasses on a beaded chain, and has never once in the 11 years I've known her wasted a single word on me. She handled Carol's estate and the transfer of the shop's business assets when I retired. I trust her, because she doesn't confuse kindness with letting things slide. I gave her the case number, sent her photographs. Forwarded her a scan of that lease application, which Deputy Ferris had let me keep after photographing it herself. I told her what Marlene had said about the barn belonging to Michael and Ashley eventually anyway. Diane was quiet on the line for a moment. Then she said, "Walter, that wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a plan." A plan. That was exactly the word for it. Over the following week, more pieces came together. The electric co-op confirmed someone had called in, asking to add a secondary contact name to the barn's account, a Gary Petrosky. A local contractor phoned asking whether Mr. Petrosky still wanted an estimate for a bathroom addition off the back stall. My neighbor down the road, Ellen, sent me a photo from 10 days earlier showing Gary's truck parked at my gate with the box truck already behind it, scouting the place before I'd even known anything was wrong. And when Dale went back out to finish the electrical work, he found 2 screws missing from the old wooden sign that hung at the end of my drive, the one Carol had painted with her own hand 30 years back. "Ben's Bend," it read, on account of the sharp curve in the road right there. In the back corner of Gary's box truck, according to Ellen, who'd gotten a good look while it was parked at the gate, there'd been a new sign, still wrapped in plastic. Petrosky Family Workshop. When Ellen told me that, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long 10 seconds before I could speak. If somebody's ever tried renaming something a person you loved built with her own hands, you understand that particular kind of theft isn't really about property. It's an attempt to erase who made the thing matter in the first place. I thanked Ellen and wrote every detail down. When people get bold enough to rename what your wife painted herself, they've stopped asking permission a long time before you noticed. They're just waiting to see how long you'll stay polite about it. I was done being polite in ways that only served the wrong people. Diane sent certified notices to Gary and Marlene Petrosky, and to Dustin, and to the woman who'd been sitting in my lawn chair, whose name turned out to be Gary's sister Rhonda. She sent a separate letter to Ashley, not accusing her of anything, simply stating clearly that she had no legal authority to grant property access to anyone outside our immediate family, and that any future access required my written consent. Diane also drafted an invoice, cleaning, lock replacement, camera installation, damage assessment for the scuffed concrete floor. Not a fortune, $1,940. Enough to be real, enough to say plainly that this had not been a family inconvenience. This had been unauthorized occupation of private property. Gary called the day he got the letter. I let it ring through to voicemail. He called again an hour later. I let that one go too. On the third call I picked up and said, "You have my attorney's number." He came in hot. "You sent me a bill, Walter." "A bill?" "I sent you consequences," I said, "for entering my property without permission, bringing a moving truck onto my land, attempting to add your name to my utility account, and setting up an office on my late wife's porch swing." He went quiet at the mention of Carol, not out of respect, I could tell, out of recalculation. "You're going to turn Ashley against Michael over this," he said. "No," I said. "You might have already managed that yourself. I'm protecting my son's marriage from the fallout of what you did. She's going to inherit that place one day anyway. She'll benefit from what I choose to leave behind," I said. "That's not the same thing as you owning any part of it right now. You can't keep family out forever, Walter." I looked out my kitchen window at the maple Carol had planted the summer Michael started high school. "Watch me," I said, and hung up. 2 days later, Gary proved he hadn't learned one single thing. My new camera pinged my phone at 8:40 on a Saturday morning. I was home in my slippers, the ratty ones Carol always threatened to throw out, drinking coffee at the kitchen table. The feed showed Gary at the gate, his truck idling behind him, Marlene in the passenger seat, the same rental sedan pulled up behind that. Gary punched the old combination into the dead keypad. Nothing. Tried it again. Then he grabbed the gate chain and rattled it like sheer persistence might convince metal to remember him fondly. I called Deputy Ferris's direct line and gave her the case number. A deputy, not her this time but a younger officer named Colby, arrived 17 minutes later. I watched the whole thing on my phone, coffee going cold in my hand. Gary argued. Marlene pointed toward the barn like she had some claim worth pointing at. The deputy pointed back toward the road. Gary waved some folded papers around that meant absolutely nothing legally, and the deputy shook his head slow. Then Gary climbed back in his truck, reversed too fast, nearly clipped the mailbox post, and left. That was the first time I actually smiled through any of this. Not because I enjoyed it, because the system had done exactly what it was built to do the moment I actually used it properly. Sunday, Michael and Ashley came to my house. Ashley hugged me in the entryway and didn't let go right away, and I could feel her shaking a little, the kind of shaking that comes from being ashamed of people you love. Michael stood behind her, looking like a man who hadn't slept a full night in a week. Good. Some sleep should get lost when you've handed the wrong person a key without thinking it through. We sat at my kitchen table. I put coffee out. Nobody touched it. Ashley went first. Walter, I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were going to move anything in. I told my mom she could ask about storing a few boxes. That's it. Boxes, not furniture, not a whole moving truck. I waited. My dad's been struggling since the second business went under, she said, and her voice cracked a little on it. My mom kept saying family shouldn't have to be shy about asking for help. I told her no more than once. She didn't listen. I should have told you myself the second she brought it up. Yes, I said. You should have. I know. I asked her one question. Did you know about the lease application? No. Did you know they'd contacted the electric company? No, God, no. Did you know they had a new sign made with their name on it? Her face went completely still. What? Michael turned to look at her, and whatever he saw in her face told him she wasn't acting. Ash? I told them about Petrosky Family Workshop, still wrapped in plastic in the back of that truck. Ashley put both hands over her face. That was the moment I stopped being frustrated with her specifically. Not because she was innocent. She wasn't. She'd opened a door she shouldn't have. But because shame had finally done what a lecture from me never could have. Michael looked at me across the table. What happens now? I'd been waiting for exactly that question. Now, I said, we make sure this can't happen again, no matter who asks for what code. Diane came out to my house the following Wednesday with a leather folder and 2 pens. She likes blue ink, always has. Says a signature should look like it belongs to somebody living, not a photocopy of a person. Michael and Ashley arrived separately, which I noticed and didn't mention. Marriage has doors a father shouldn't go kicking open, unless somebody's genuinely stuck behind one. Diane walked us through the documents slow and clear. First, the barn and the 12 acres would move into the Ben family trust. I'd control it while I was living. Michael would receive full beneficial interest after I passed, but the property could never be sold, mortgaged, renamed, leased, or transferred without trustee approval. No spouse, in-law, cousin, or family friend would have independent access rights going forward. Any use required written permission from me, full stop. Access codes would be individual to each person, logged, and revocable at any time. Second, any future claim related to the property by a spouse or that spouse's family would require a proper postnuptial agreement, drafted with independent counsel representing both sides. Ashley had already spoken with her own lawyer, a friend of a friend down in Madison, and agreed to sign a written acknowledgement that the property was separate, Ben family property, and that her parents had no rights to it, present or future, under any circumstances. Third, Diane set up a separate fund, education, and a start in life for any grandchildren Michael and Ashley might eventually have. Ashley cried reading that section out loud. Michael did too, though he worked hard not to let it show. That fund wouldn't pass through Gary, Marlene, Michael, or even Ashley if the timing or circumstances ever made that unwise. It would sit there, clean, patient, waiting for whoever it was actually meant for. There was one more document. A formal letter to Gary and Marlene Petrosky, copied through Diane's office, stating they were barred from entering my property, the barn, the drive, or any trust land going forward. It included the sheriff's report numbers, the second gate incident, the invoice, and a payment deadline. Michael read it twice. Then he looked at me. I'll cover what they owe you. No, Ashley said. We both turned toward her. She wiped her eyes, sat up straight in her chair. They pay it. Not you, not us. Them. Michael studied her for a second, then nodded. You're right. That was the first moment I believed the two of them might come out of this stronger than they'd gone into it. But Gary wasn't finished. Men like Gary don't accept a closed door until they've bruised their own shoulder shoving against it at least once more. 2 weeks after the trust was signed, he drove up to Minneapolis and showed up at Michael and Ashley's apartment. I know because Ashley called me from the bedroom while Michael kept her father talking in the living room. Her voice was shaking with anger this time, not fear. He's saying you manipulated all of us, she said. He's telling Michael he never should have signed anything. What do you want to do? I asked. A pause. Then my daughter-in-law said, come up. Bring Diane if she's free. Diane was always free for exactly that kind of trouble. We got there within the hour. Gary stood in their living room, red-faced, jabbing a finger toward Michael. Marlene sat stiff on the sofa, purse in her lap like a woman bracing for weather somebody else had brought into the house. Gary turned when I walked in. "You," he said. "Me," I said. Diane stepped in behind me, reading glasses pushed low, folder in hand. Gary looked at her and let out a short laugh. "More paperwork." "Yes," Diane said. "I've enjoyed very few sentences in my career more than that one." She handed him a copy of the trespass notice, the unpaid invoice, and a still frame from the gate camera. Then a final letter stating that if he contacted Michael or Ashley regarding the property, the trust, the invoice, or any future inheritance matter, all communication would go through her office from that point on. Gary scanned the letter, and the color drained out of his face a line at a time. "This is insane," he said. Ashley came down the hallway. She'd been crying, but she was past that part now. "No," she said. "We're done being useful to you two." Gary turned toward her. "Ashley, you don't understand what your father-in-law is doing here." "I understand exactly what he's doing," she said. "He's protecting something my husband's mother helped build, from people who tried to put their own name on it." Marlene flinched at that, just slightly, and that told me she'd known about the sign the whole time. Gary looked at Michael. "You're going to let her talk to us like this?" Michael stepped up next to Ashley. Not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. "Yes," he said. One word. Maybe the most solid word he'd ever said in his life. Gary's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Diane tapped the invoice once with a polished nail. "Payments due Friday." Marlene stood, picked up her purse. "Gary," she said quietly. "Let's go." He looked around the room for someone to hand him back the old rules he'd been operating under. Nobody did. They left without slamming the door, which surprised me a little. Sometimes defeat is too heavy to carry with drama attached. The invoice got paid by cashier's check 2 days later. The barn stayed quiet the rest of that summer. In August, Michael and Ashley drove out with me for a weekend. Michael fixed a loose board on the porch swing without being asked. Ashley swept the concrete floor and set Carol's old quilt back where it belonged, folded neatly over the workbench stool, not on display, just home. I watched her do it from the doorway, and for a second, with the afternoon light coming in low across the floor, and her holding that quilt like it mattered to her too, I had to look away for a moment. That evening we sat out by the fire pit as the light went soft and the mosquitoes came out like they always do, uninvited and certain of their welcome. Michael stood near the grill, nervous in a way I hadn't seen from him since he was a teenager, holding a small paper bag. "I brought something," he said. He pulled out a new wooden sign wrapped in brown paper. My chest went tight before I could stop it. Then he turned it around. "Ben's Bend," not new letters. The original name matched exactly, down to the slight lean in the B that Carol always did without meaning to. "I had a sign painter down in Eau Claire match Mom's handwriting from old photos," Michael said. "I know I can't undo what her parents tried to do. I just wanted the right name back where it belongs." I took the sign from him. My hands weren't as steady as I would have liked. "Get the drill," I said. We hung it together, out at the end of the drive, right where it had always been. Gary and Marlene haven't come back. They haven't apologized either, and I stopped waiting on that a good while ago. Some people treat an apology like a coupon, only worth using when there's something in it for them. Michael and Ashley are still married. Better than before, I'd say. Not easier. Better. There's a real difference between those two words. Ashley learned that love doesn't mean saying yes to every request from people who claim to be family. Michael learned that a marriage built on avoiding hard conversations isn't actually peaceful. It's just quiet in a way that eventually gets expensive. And I learned that protecting what your family built sometimes means putting up boundaries sturdy enough that the people you love can finally stop holding the door shut with their own 2 hands. This whole thing taught me something I still carry around with me most days. The mistake a lot of us make is thinking boundaries and love live on opposite sides of something. The truth is, the clearest boundary you ever draw is often the most loving thing you'll ever leave behind for the people who come after you. If there's one thing worth taking from tonight, let it be this. If you've got something worth protecting, a workshop, a business, a piece of your family's history, put it in writing while you're calm and clear-headed, instead of waiting until somebody forces your hand and you're doing it angry. And here's something worth sitting with tonight, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. Is there something in your own life that people have quietly assumed they're entitled to, simply because you never said otherwise out loud? The Ben Family Trust is signed, funded, sitting safe in Diane's office with copies in my own safe at home. The barn has cameras now, individual codes for everyone who's actually family, and a gate that makes a genuinely satisfying sound when it swings shut behind the right people. The grandchildren's fund is sitting there too. No grandchildren yet, but I'm a patient man. Good things built the right way can afford to wait. Last month I drove out alone for the first time since all of it happened. The air smelled like cut grass and machine oil, same as it always has. I opened the barn, set my thermos down, and walked straight over to that porch swing. Carol's quilt sat folded exactly where Ashley had left it. I sat down with a cup of coffee and listened to the wind move through that old oak Carol's father had planted before either of us was born. A workshop with a quilt still folded on the bench still says somebody's coming back to it. Just not everybody. Not anymore. I'd genuinely like to hear what you all think about how this played out. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think calling the sheriff straight away was the right call. Drop a 2 if you think I should have confronted Gary myself before bringing the law into it. Or drop a 3 if you think Ashley should have faced harder consequences for handing over that code in the first place. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Son, daughter, neighbor, friend, whoever you are, and what time it is right where you're sitting. And if somebody in your own family has ever quietly assumed ownership over something that was never theirs to claim, I'd love to hear that story from you too. If tonight meant something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe, because there's more coming, stories about the quiet, patient work of protecting the things and the people who actually matter. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.